In 2010, a woman was arrested who was purportedly responsible for the deaths of 5 taxi drivers, whose bodies were found in a well with drinking water at a depth of over 250 meters in García, Nuevo León, Mexico. This woman was identified as Cristina Soledad Sánchez Esquivel. Cristina Sanchez was born in 1979 in Monterrey, Nuevo León, Mexico. Her family was needy, and clothes and shoes were a luxury for Cristina in her childhood. She had been subjected to numerous acts of violence. At the age of 16, she became pregnant against her will and gave birth to her first daughter, Maria Guadalupe. Over the following years, she gave birth to 5 more children, 3 girls in addition to Maria and 2 boys, whom she loved and cared for, being an attentive and loving mother. Cristina worked as a plumber on construction sites for a long time. People who knew her described her as a reliable worker, a loving mother of her children, and a jealous woman. However, as would later become known, she had a lover herself. This fact would come to light when Cristina Sanchez's double life is revealed. On June 5, 2010, the woman raised her hand to catch a taxi. It was just after 4 in the afternoon, and she was on the sidewalk of a peripheral road near the bus station. Despite several taxi drivers signaling, she saw one that matched the description. The man was over 60, thin. He stopped to pick up the woman. She did not draw attention, looked like a typical passenger, well-built, tanned, and with an ordinary appearance that didn't raise any suspicions. She asked the driver how much he would charge to take her to García, Nuevo León. Because she missed her bus, she showed him her ticket. The taxi driver responded 500 pesos plus luggage. The woman shook her head in discontent, but still got into the back seat. Without much thought, she attempted to start a conversation, but the dialogue was awkward. She needed to travel 130 kilometers. As soon as they reached García, she told the driver that her relatives were waiting for her and asked if he could take her to the location. The driver agreed, but upon seeing a dirt road, he said he couldn't drive that path in his car. She discontentedly conveyed that she needed to go get money and that her relatives were already waiting for her. She just needed to go up the hill to be able to pay him. The disgruntled driver got to the top of the hill and said he would wait for her there. However, Cristina moved closer, pulled out a huge knife with her right hand, and grabbed the taxi driver by the neck, turning his face. He tried to react, but the seatbelt constrained him, leaving him immobile. Aggressively, she began shouting, "Here you are. I've been fed up with you, and now I'll deal with you." She was noticeably irritated and extremely aggressive. It seemed like a different person, as if she had lost her mind. The woman ordered the driver to slowly get out so as not to soil the car with blood. He told her he would only pull the handbrake, and when he did so, he noticed he had a wound on 3 fingers. He opened the door, and they got out. She told him to walk towards the hill and not even think about picking up stones or trying to escape. As they moved forward, the driver saw men chatting far ahead. The man broke free as best he could and ran like he never had before. Along the way, he grabbed a stick to defend himself and finally ended up on a ranch. There he saw 2 children, which calmed him down considerably. Then the owner of the place came out and saw the man was injured, immediately calling his friend. A cloth was given to the driver there because he was bleeding heavily. However, he declined treatment and immediately requested the police to be called. Within 10 minutes, a patrol arrived at the ranch. Ekteb, the man's name, explained that a woman attacked him, took his car, and that they could likely find it on the dirt road a few meters away. This man's statement seemed unlikely since it was very rare to encounter claims about women being involved in robberies. The search for the car and the woman began, and it didn't take long. They managed to spot the car being driven by the woman. They detained her and promptly sent her along with the victim to provide testimony. The police were surprised because the woman did not look like a murderer at all. Her face was calm and she showed no signs of aggression. At times, she appeared uneasy and contemplative. When she began to talk, no one could have imagined that some unsolved cases were committed by this woman. Initially, she mentioned that she did it because she felt hatred and disgust towards men, as she had experienced cruel treatment in her youth and was abandoned as a child. It was her way of releasing all that had been done to her. After that, she confessed that, together with her accomplice, she committed robberies and murders. The 27-year-old Aarón Herrera Perez, using the alias Aztec and Rolly, who was still a minor at the time. Then, Cristina detailed her method, which involved selecting a taxi driver who was of slight build and posed little threat, driving them to a dirt road, taking the car, and disposing of the body in a well with drinking water. The police officers presented her with photographs of missing men, and the woman pointed to a photo of a 68-year-old Abel Mendez Hernandez, a driver by profession, whom she had thrown into the well. The confession became more detailed. The woman explained that they had to attack one of the taxi drivers because he resisted. They began to beat him, and even after the blows, he was still conscious and breathing. Eventually, they got into the car and drove to the location of the well. When they threw him in, the taxi driver was still alive and started shouting for help. She added that in desperation to get rid of him, they took several stones and began to throw them at him until he stopped shouting. Later, she noted that almost all of her victims were elderly. Only one was younger, a 31-year-old Omar Perez Velasquez. Cristina stated that they beat him and threw him into the well. The young man had been missing since May 28th of this year. The next day, Cristina Sanchez's name was echoing throughout the country, and journalists dubbed her the taxi killer. On June 7th, representatives of the civil defense and some relatives of the victims went to the location where, according to the woman, she had disposed of the bodies. A camera was lowered into the well, but no body was found. Then, using the rope to which the camera was attached, they managed to retrieve hair and fatty deposits with tissues. On the same day, authorities arrived. After learning that the well was too narrow, they hired specialists in well extraction. Before the shocked gaze of the relatives who were waiting to find their loved ones, a photograph of a girl was pulled out, and it turned out to be the granddaughter of taxi driver Abel Mendez Hernandez. He had gone missing 2 months prior. Interrogations and searches for bodies continued for the next several days. And under pressure, the woman confessed to killing her lover, 39-year-old Martin Tobor, who had been missing for a month. On June 10th, one man came to testify against Cristina. He was a taxi driver who managed to survive the attack. The 54-year-old man, who had been stabbed but was not thrown into the well, was locked in the taxi's trunk, from where he eventually escaped. He explained that Cristina was accompanied by 2 others. They told him where to drive, and they headed towards Panteon García. One of the accomplices asked him to slow down so he could relieve himself, and as soon as the driver did so, they started beating him and threw him out of the car. They tried to injure him, he resisted, but they still managed to throw him to the ground. Then they lifted him and placed him in the trunk, as they planned to throw him into the well. The man resisted with all his might, fell, rolling on the ground. Then he ran and, seeing that he was being pursued, hid in the grass. Since they couldn't find him, they left. The man walked for hours until exhaustion overcame him, and he fell asleep. The next day, he mentioned that a commissioner helped him, as someone reported a man lying on the ground covered in thorns all over his body. His worried family called his mobile phone. However, a woman answered the call, introducing herself as his lover, and said he didn't want to hear anything from them and asked them not to bother him again. But this conversation didn't convince them, and they decided to approach the authorities to report what was happening. The next day, a search group for Cristina's accomplices was organized. One of them, Aarón Herrera, also known as Aztec, was arrested while working at a lumber mill. When he was apprehended, he proclaimed his innocence, mentioning that he hadn't killed anyone, was not involved in anything, and his conscience was clear. On June 14th, after search efforts in a ditch located in the foothills of Cerro del Mana, where Cristina had disposed of her victims, around 6 o'clock in the evening, a wall was successfully extracted from a depth of almost 272 meters. After navigating through the rocks at the bottom, the body of a man in jeans and a shirt was liberated. It was unrecognizable, as by that time, the body had been in a state of decay for at least 3 weeks. Experts immediately placed it on a stretcher for later forensic examination. On that day, due to the advanced decomposition process, identification could not be performed. In this case, a bone analysis was necessary. Achieving success, the group continued their work the next day to retrieve bodies. Another unidentified decomposing body was found. By that time, the authorities knew that Cristina was telling the truth. After conducting investigations, it was confirmed that this woman had accomplices in committing her crimes and that her ordinary appearance had nothing to do with who she truly was. A ruthless woman described by a psychologist as antisocial, unfeeling, sadistic, cold, and lacking empathy. Furthermore, she led a difficult life full of insults, sorrow, disappointment, and self-neglect. Cristina was a lonely woman, tormented by men for many years. When asked if she regretted her actions, she replied that she didn't. The only thing she regretted was not killing her last victim and that she would undoubtedly do it if given the chance. After conducting laboratory tests, the bodies were identified. Among them were 68-year-old Abel Mendez and 31-year-old Omar Perez, who was already in an advanced state of decay. His appearance was horrifying, and his skin was completely dark due to dampness. Additionally, in the following days, another body was retrieved from the well. It was confirmed that Cristina Sanchez had planned and executed 5 crimes against taxi drivers, taking their lives to steal their cars and later sell them. She added that all the crimes were committed with her accomplices. On December 20, 2012, in the first criminal court in San Pedro, Cristina Soledad Sánchez Esquivel was sentenced to 195 years and 11 months of imprisonment for the murder of 5 taxi drivers. Her accomplice, 27-year-old Aarón Herrera Hernández, was sentenced to 152 years and 4 months in prison. Although due to the maximum penalty set by state law, they would spend only 60 years in prison. A few days later, another body, killed by Cristina Soledad Sánchez Esquivel, was retrieved from the well. Well, that's all from me today. This was ZARGO with you. Take care of yourself and your loved ones.